Hi, I'm Michelle from Birdcage and Thread, and thanks for purchasing the Slimline Wallet pattern. This video focuses more on the construction of the wallet than the actual sewing, as I assume you know how to sew. In the PDF pattern, each heading has a video bookmark, enabling you to fast forward where you left off in case you get an interruption. So here's what you need to get started. You'll need a fat quarter of fabric. Now the wallet only uses one fat quarter, however to give a bit of contrast I'm going to be using 2 throughout the tutorial. Then you'll need some interfacing. This is Pellon SF101 and it's a mid-weight woven fusible interfacing, and it comes on a bolt 20 inches wide, so you'll need 7.5 inches of that. Then you'll need some clear vinyl. This is mid to lightweight vinyl. It's 8 gauge and you can purchase this either at a fabric store or the hardware store, so you'll only need a small piece of that. Next you'll need a nylon zipper, which is at least 5 inches long. It can be longer as we will be cutting it down later. Next you'll need a snap. In the tutorial I'm using a plastic cam snap, but you can use the prong style or even the sew-in style. Then you'll need your regular sewing supplies, rotary cutter, mat and ruler, scissors, and most importantly a point turner. You can get by without a rotary cutter and mat, however it just makes things a little easier. The only other unusual supply that you'll need is either a Teflon foot or a roller foot. Now if you don't have one of those, you can just use a regular presser foot and take a piece of Scotch Magic style tape. This is just a generic brand, but if you use that style of tape, place a piece on the bottom so that the sticky side is stuck to the bottom of the presser foot, and then cut out the hole where the needle goes, and that way it will glide smoothly across the vinyl. Now that we have everything, let's get started. So to get started, we're going to cut the first fat quarter using the fabric cutting layer on page 4 of the pattern. Now I've squared up my fat quarter here, so this is 18 inches by 21 inches wide. Now you'll notice on the cutting layout that there are 2 measurements, 9 3/4 inch and 4 1/4 inch. We'll cut 2 strips according to those measurements. So the first one I'll cut is 9 3/4. And then the second measurement is 4 1/4. So I'll cut that now. So now you should have 3 strips. I'll leave this one in place, which was the 9 3/4 strip. I'll leave that one in place, but I'll just move these other 2 out slightly. This one is waist, so we can move that to the side. This one will just push up here. Now I'm going to be cutting these 2 widths. So I've got a 7.5 width and then another 7.5 width. and this extra is waste, so I'll move that to the side. So now we have piece A, which is that piece there. So I'll put that to the side. Then we need to slice these other two here, these two pieces here. So these two pieces are both 7.5 inches wide, but now I need to cut the depth, which is the second measurement. So the first one is 5 inches and then 4.25 inches. So I'll just rotate it 90 degrees. So the first measurement is 5 inches, which is piece B, so I'll put that to the side. Then the second measurement is 4.25 inches. Which is piece C. And as I'm going, I'll also label the pieces. And I'm purposely using directional fabric so you can see that it works with directional. So that's piece A, that's piece B. I'll just pop that on top there. And piece C, which I'll put on top of piece B. Then I'll put that to the side. Now I'm going to move on to this strip here, and I'll be cutting these measurements off the strip. Just makes the cutting process a little bit quicker and easier. And as I go, I'll be adding labels. And these labels are just masking tape that I've used a Sharpie on. So piece D is 1 inch wide. I'll mark that. Piece E is also 1 inch wide. Then we've got F at 3.5 inches wide. Now I'll just keep going with this cutting, and I'll label it at the end. The next piece is 4 inches. Then 3 inches. Then another 3 inches. Then the next two pieces, I've purposely done it this way so that when the wallet is finished, if you're using directional fabric, the fabric will be going in the direction that it's supposed to. That's why I've swapped those two pieces around. So the first measurement I cut is 4 inches. And this last piece is waist, so I'll put that to the side. Then to do these two pieces here, I'll turn this piece 90 degrees and I'll cut 1.5 inches. Then 2.5 inches. So I'll leave all these pieces intact and then I'll label them. So that was F, G, H, I. J was the smaller piece of the two that I rotated, J and K. So now you have all your pieces cut out of the first fat quarter. Also cut out a second fat quarter if you're using the contrast, which I have here. Now I'll show you which pieces I swap out to give the contrast here. So these pieces are piece B, pieces D and E, piece G, and also piece K. So now you should have two complete sets of pieces, just with the opposite fabric. So don't throw this away, you can make a second wallet out of it. So now that we've got our pieces with the contrast, it's time to cut the interfacing. So now we're going to cut out the interfacing according to the interfacing cutting layout. Now we have a strip of interfacing that's 7.5 inches long by the width of the interfacing. Then we need to cut out pieces A, C, J1, J2, L1 and L2 according to the measurements on the interfacing layout. So we'll cut piece A. Then piece C. And then with J, it's 1.5 inches wide. Then we'll rotate this piece 90 degrees and then cut the second measurement, which is 3.5 inches. So that's J1. And that's J2. So you've got two of the same size pieces there. Now with this remaining piece of interfacing, you can just, to do the 1 inch diameter circles, you can use a coin that's close enough to 1 inch in diameter. You can use an American quarter if you're in America, or Australia, the 10-cent piece is close to 1 inch in diameter. So just trace those out on the interfacing and then cut both those circles out. So now we'll be fusing the interfacing to the respective fabric pieces. So for this you'll need pieces A, C and J. So to get started, flip piece A so the wrong side is facing up. Then fuse the interfacing to the back of piece A. Then repeat the same process for piece C. Flip it so the wrong side is facing up. Then fuse the interfacing to the back of piece C. Then take piece J, just as you did before, flip that over so the wrong side is facing up. Now these two interfacing pieces are slightly shorter than the fabric piece. So take one of the pieces and centre that over piece J. So you should have a 1/4 inch gap either end of the fabric piece. That's just to reduce bulk in the seam. So fuse the first piece of interfacing down, then fuse the second piece straight over the top of the first. So you've got a 1/4 inch gap on either end. Then the only remaining interfacing pieces that you have are L1 and L2. But put those aside for now, as we'll be fusing those on in a later step. The next thing we're going to cut is the vinyl. Now the vinyl can be a bit tricky because you can't see it. So what I like to do, I've got a strip. It's just over 6 inches wide, but it's not the point. I'll just cut a strip off the roll. I like to line it up with one of these lines. I use the 10-inch mark. So I need to cut 4 1/4 by 3 inches. So all I need to do, I don't need to see the vinyl, all I need to do is line my ruler up with the 10-inch mark where I've got the edge of my vinyl lined up as well. So I'll line the 4 1/4 inch mark up with the 10 inch mark on my mat. So the 4 1/4 inch on my ruler with the 10 inch line on the mat. Like that. Then I rotate it 90 degrees. Because I know this edge is straight, I'm going to line it up with this 5 inch mark. It doesn't matter which inch mark, just as long as it's straight. I need to straighten up this edge here. So now I have 2 straight edges, one along here and one along here. So again, lining up this edge here, I'll mark in 3 inches. And that way I have a piece 4 1/4 inches across by 3 inches down. So now we come to the fun part of sewing the wallet. So for this you'll need piece D and the clear vinyl piece. This is clear, I've just put a paper backing on it so you can see it. So take piece D over to your ironing board and place it wrong side up. Then take the long edge and fold that in half and press it with your iron. Open that back out and take one of the long edges and fold that to the centre crease that you made and then press. And repeat with the other side, so you'll have 2 raw edges going to the centre. Then refold that centre crease and that forms a binding. And that binding will be 4 1/4 inches long. Then take your clear vinyl piece and take the 4 1/4 inch edge and place that inside the binding. And just remember not to use pins. If you need to keep that in place, use some Wonder Clips or something similar. Don't use pins because it will leave marks in the vinyl. So then with your Teflon foot, sew a top stitch along here about 1/8 of an inch away. Just make sure that you catch both sides of the binding in your top stitching. So next we're going to work on the small inner pocket. So for this we need pieces F and G. So lay them right side up on your work surface with the 4 1/4 inches being vertical. And make sure the direction of the fabric is also facing up for piece F. So leaving piece F face up on your work surface, bring piece G up and over and line up the 4 1/4 inch edges on the right hand side, and using your regular presser foot take a 1/4 inch seam and sew a line of stitching down this right hand side edge there. Take it over to your ironing board and with piece G's wrong side facing up, roll this piece across to the right and with your iron press along this seam here. Then flip the piece over and just making sure that the seam allowances are facing this piece G. Then take this other raw edge and line it up with the other side's raw edge here. Then take your iron and press the other side. Then if you flip it back over, you'll see that it's formed a self-binding. And then top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away along that self-binding edge there. Now we're going to work on the zipper pocket. So for that we'll need the zipper and piece E. So firstly decide which way you want the zipper to open, whether you want it to open from left to right or from right to left. Lay out the zipper how you'd like that to be. I'm going to do from left to right, and place the zipper facing up on your work surface. Then take piece E and with the right side facing down, place that anywhere along the zipper, but just avoiding the metal ends, and line up the raw edge of piece E with this top edge of the zipper tape here, and then just pin that in place. Then take that over to your sewing machine and using a zipper foot, sew a 1/4 inch seam along this top edge here. Now we have piece E sewn to the zipper, take it over to your ironing board and fold piece E up and press. But we're not going to top stitch along there yet, that'll get done later. So flip the zipper over and then fold the other side of piece E to just above the stitching line on the zipper. I'll just hold it a little bit closer so you can see that it's just above the stitching line. Then lift up the zipper tape only, and you can see that there's the other raw edge of piece E from the seam. That's the seam allowance of the seam that we just sewed. So fold the opposite raw edge over the top of the other raw edge and then lay that zipper tape over the top, and keep going along the zipper tape. So essentially you're closing in the raw edges. So now we're going to work on the bottom section of the zipper pocket. So for this you'll need pieces H and I, and for this demonstration I'll leave the labels on. So make sure with these two pieces that the direction of the fabric is facing up. So take your zipper and line this bottom part of the zipper tape up with the right hand side of piece I along this raw edge here. Also making sure that the ends of piece E are lining up with the ends of piece I. Once you're happy with the placement, just take piece H and just flip it straight over like that. Making sure they're all lined up around the 3 edges and also lined up with the edge of the zipper tape, and pin that in place. And then take that over to your machine and using a zipper foot, take a 1/4 inch seam and sew a line of stitching along the bottom section of that zipper tape. So now we have this seam sewn along the zipper here. Take the top layer, open that out, and with your iron press that seam open there, and do the same for the underside. Fold that piece out and press. Then turning the zipper back to the right side again, sew a top stitch about 1/8 of an inch along this edge here. We're still not going to top stitch along there, so just leave that for now. That will be done later. And don't trim the ends yet. The zipper will be trimmed at a later stage. So you can see that I've pressed the bottom parts of the zipper pocket open and then done a top stitch along that bottom section there. So now we're going to baste everything to the lining. So I'll put this aside for now and take the ID pocket and also the small inner pocket. So taking the small inner pocket and making sure that the direction of the fabric is facing up, and also the self-binding edge is along the right hand side. Then with the clear pocket, making sure the binding is along the right hand side, line up the 3 edges around here, but most importantly that you have an even gap on both edges here. Then using Wonder Clips, clip all those layers together. Then using your Teflon foot, baste around these 3 edges here. You don't need to baste all the way around. You just need to baste about 1 inch or so in width, just enough to hold all those layers together. So you can see I've basted the ID pocket to the small inner pocket around the 3 edges here. Only about 1 inch or so, just enough to tack it into place. Now we need to take piece C and we're going to ultimately sew the 2 pockets onto that. So making sure piece C's directional fabric is facing upwards. Then we place the zipper pocket lining up the raw edges, place that on top of piece C on the right hand side. Then pin that in place and baste close to the edge around all 3 sides. We're still not going to baste this down yet, just these 3 sides here. So you can see I've basted around these 3 edges of the zipper pocket, but I've only sewn on the fabric. I didn't come across the zipper teeth at all, just the 3 sides of the fabric. Then take the 2 pockets together, the clear ID pocket and the small inner pocket that are now basted together. Place that on the left hand side of piece C, making sure the raw edges are lined up. And then once again using your Teflon foot, just baste in 3 spots on each edge there. So the next thing we need to do is stitch this top section here down. So firstly, make sure that your raw edges are tucked underneath the zipper tape. Then we're going to do 2 rows of top stitching. One along this edge here, close to the zipper tape, and then another one along here. And that will also, at the same time, top stitch, it will also stitch that top section to piece C, which will form an enclosed pocket. Now that we have the 2 rows of top stitching along here, you can see now that we have an enclosed pocket with all the raw edges hidden inside that pocket there, apart from these edges here, which we'll cover up later. Now we're going to trim the zipper, and the most important thing is, before trimming the zipper, is to move the zipper pull to about the centre of the pocket. Then using old scissors, or not your good fabric scissors, trim the zipper flush with piece C and repeat that for the other side. Like that. And don't pull the zipper back across here because you'll pull that zipper pull completely off. So just leave that where it is for the rest of the construction of the wallet. So now with your lining piece facing up and the ID pocket is on the left and the zipper pocket is on the right, take piece B and place that right side down, lining up the 2 long edges here. Place that right sides together and remembering to use wonder clips because you've got the vinyl here. Line up the raw edges here and place clips along that edge there. Then using your regular presser foot, sew a 1/4 inch seam along this edge here. So take this whole piece over to your ironing board and roll piece B back and press along that seam there, just being very careful not to touch your iron to the vinyl because it will melt. Then once you've pressed that, flip it over and then just push that fabric down like that and press along this edge here. And then when you flip that over, you'll see that it forms a self-binding along here. So once you've done that, top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam along the self-binding edge there. Then baste along this bottom edge here. And once you've basted that in, that will take care of all these little loose pieces here, and that will all get sewn down. Then once you've done that basting stitch, you'll have a little bit extra of piece B, so just trim that flush with the lining. So you can see the basting stitch along this bottom section here. Now I'm just going to trim off the extra of piece B from the underneath. And that's now flush with the lining piece. So now we're going to work on the tab closure, and for this we need pieces K and J. Just a word about piece J. It has 2 layers of interfacing fused to it, and the interfacing is shorter, so you'll have a 1/4 inch gap at each of the short ends, just so you know that there's not a mistake there. So put pieces J and K right sides together, lining up this long raw edge here. Then using a 1/4 inch seam, sew along a little way and then leave about a 1.5 inch gap. So break your stitching and then resume your stitching to continue on to the end there. Then take this piece over to your ironing board and place it so piece K is facing up. Then take a scrap of card and line up that card with your stitching line. Then roll piece K back, and using the card as a guide, just push the fabric against the card. It's just so it gives an even edge where your stitching is broken there. So once you've done that, press that down with your iron. So now we have this edge pressed open, we're going to sew the other long edge. So just fold this piece K to meet this edge on piece J, and sew a 1/4 inch seam down this long edge here. Now we're going to sew these 2 short ends, but we need to take into account the excess of fabric here. So what we do, either take a pencil or a chopstick and insert that into the end that's not pressed. So this seam here hasn't been pressed open. So we put the chopstick in there. The end of it's about here, but it doesn't really matter. You can go all the way along if you'd like to, but we're just going to deal with one end first. So just insert it and push it up against the seam there and just roll it. And what you're doing is creating a pleat. So the fold in the fabric that makes that pleat is up against that raw edge. And then when you fold down the other end, you'll see that it lines up, that fold lines up with the other raw edge. So I'll just demonstrate that again. So you insert your chopstick or pencil and just roll it upwards enough to create a pleat, and then press down the other end, and that fold will then line up with the raw edge on the other side. And then using your regular presser foot, just sew a 1/4 inch seam down that short end. And then you repeat the same process with the other end. So you can see the 2 short ends sewn along here. Now leaving this pleated section facing upwards, clip all the 4 corners. So just clip along there, making sure you don't cut into the stitching. Like that. And then where the break in your stitching was along that long edge, turn this whole thing right side out. And then using a pointed tool, just gently push the corners out. Just snip that loose thread off. And then take that to your iron and press that whole thing down. So now the tab has been pressed, we're going to top stitch along each of these edges here. Now I'll go and top stitch that now, and I'll come back and I'll show you how to finish the top stitching neatly. This is how I achieve a neat top stitch on the tab for the front of the wallet. You can see on this finished one that there's no back stitching. And if I had just left that, the seam would unravel. You can see at the end, on the back side, I have back stitched. But that's not so critical. It's the front that needs to look neat. So how I achieve this, I started my stitching on the right hand side of the tab and take a back stitch. Then sew all the way along till about a stitch length from the end. Then leave a generous tail and cut your threads. So now you can cut the threads where you back stitched. Then turn the tab over and take the thread that's coming out from the bottom fabric. So in other words, this would have been your bobbin thread, and pull in the opposite direction of the other thread. So give it a tug and you'll feel the thread from the underside come up. Then with a needle, pull that thread through. So now you have two threads coming out the back of your tab. Then just do a couple of knots to secure the threads. Then thread a needle. And then place that needle back into the fabric in the same spot where you created the knot. Making sure the needle doesn't come out the other side, which I just did there. So I'll pull that back out and then try it again. And the needle's not on the other side, but it's coming out probably about 1/2 inch away from where I inserted the needle. So just pull the threads through and keep pulling until you unthread the needle. You probably can't see it, but you can see the knot, or I can see the knot on the fabric there. So give a tug on the thread, and I just heard a little pop, and that sunk the knot into the fabric. And then I can trim these threads here. So now I have a neat finish on the top and a neat finish on the bottom, and then you just repeat the same process for the other edge, remembering to start from the right hand side, take a back stitch, and then go to about a stitch length away from the end and repeat the same process. You can see that I didn't start my stitching from the very end. That's not so critical, because if you look in the sample here, you do more stitching over the back here, so you won't notice where you started from with this top stitching here. So I hope that helps with creating a nice neat finish for you. Now we're going to work on the outer. So take piece A and lay it right side up, making sure that the 7.5 inch edges go horizontal. Also, if you're using directional fabric, make sure the pattern direction is facing upwards. Then take a quilting ruler and measure 2 1/8 inch up from the bottom edge and 1.5 inches in from the left hand edge. Then take the tab and make sure the pattern direction is also facing up, and place the long end of the tab against the quilting ruler. Then I like to take a second ruler and line the short edge up with that second ruler. Just gives it a nice 90-degree edge for the tab to sit in to make sure that everything's measured correctly. Once you're happy with the placement, you can remove the ruler and just pin that in place. Then to secure the tab to piece A, sew a rectangle about 1/2 inch in width along this right hand edge of the tab. Once you've sewn the rectangle, sew an X through the centre of the rectangle just to give it a bit extra strength. So now we're going to mark the snap placement on piece A. So take the quilting ruler and measure 2 7/8 inches up from the bottom edge and 1.5 inches in from the right edge, and just make a mark with a removable marker at that point. So now we're going to reinforce the back of this point here where the snap's going to be placed. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can measure that measurement again on the back side of piece A, or you can take a pin and place the pin through that mark that you've just made so it's coming out the other side. Then remove the pin and you can see a tiny little pinhole on the interfacing where the pin went through. Then you can simply center the circle over that pinhole and fuse that in place. Then place another circle, the L2, fuse that over the top of the first, and that just gives some reinforcement for the snap. And then go ahead and set your snap according to your instructions for your particular snap. Now that I have one side of the snap set in place, we need to set the other snap on the tab here. To do this, measure in 1/2 inch from the end of the tab. And we also need to mark that in the centre of the short side. So the tab measures 1.5 inches, so the centre of that will be 3/4 inch. So I'll just mark that with a dot and then place the other side of the snap on this mark. So now we have the snap in place. That's the underside of the snap there. It's time to work on putting this all together. So I'm going to refer to the top and the bottom of piece A. And by this I mean this 7.5 inch edge here, which is closest to the tab, I'm going to call that the bottom. And this 7.5 inch edge here, which is furthest away from the tab, as the top. So we're going to flip piece A over. Then we're going to find the centre of this bottom 7.5 inch edge here. So the centre of that is 3 3/4 inches. Then from that mark there that you just made, measure 2 inches either side of that mark. So you have a 4 inch total gap there. Then you take the lining piece and place that right side up. So making sure the direction of the fabric is facing up, and you have your ID pocket on the left and the zipper pocket on the right. Then take piece A and that edge you just made those marks and line those raw edges up together. So the bottom of the lining together with piece A. And then remembering to use wonder clips as you have vinyl underneath here. Clip that in place. Then using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew from this mark here, this first one, all the way through to the other mark here. So just ignore that centre mark, go from here all the way to here and catching all those layers together. So I've sewn that seam there between those marks. We can remove the clips from the end. Now we take the top of piece A and fold that underneath the lining and match up this raw edge of the top of piece A with the bottom section of the lining there. So all these raw edges here, and match those up. Clip all those layers in place. Now this time we're only going to sew from the end up to that line of stitching. You can go a couple of stitches over, then break your stitching and resume at the end of the stitching line here, going all the way to the end. So I've done the 2 lines of stitching here, and it appears as though there's 1 line of stitching. But if I turn the piece over, you can see the break in the stitching line here. That's so we can turn the whole piece right side out when we're done. So if you turn the piece so that the X is facing up, and you'll notice that piece A is much longer than the inner lining piece. Don't worry about that, we're going to fix that with some pleats, just as we did on the tab, on the ends of the tab. So using either a chopstick or a pencil, insert the pencil or chopstick just underneath the first layer only of that fabric. And just as we did before, roll that fabric back to form a pleat, so that the pleat fold is in line with that raw edge. And then just place a clip through all those layers there. Then to match up the other end, we just smooth out the fabric and place a clip on that end. Don't worry that the lining piece doesn't quite hit the top of that fold, because it's not meant to do that. So just smooth out that fabric there and place a clip. Then we do the same for the other side, but we need to move this tab out the way. So just tuck that inside. I've just folded the end of the tab, tucked it in, and you can just pin it out of the way for now. Then repeat the same process, insert the chopstick or pencil just under that first layer only, and create a pleat at that bottom raw edge there. And place a clip. Then again smooth out the fabric, and you'll end up with a fold at the top there, and place a clip there. Then using a 1/4 inch seam, sew down one side and then the other side. So now we've sewn the 2 short ends here with the pleat at the bottom. Now we're going to clip the bottom corners only. There's no need to clip the top corners because they'll help keep the corner nicely placed once it's turned right side out. But the most important thing is when you're clipping these bottom corners here is that you have this side facing you, because if I turn it over and go to cut that corner off, I'll cut into this bottom pleat here and you'll have a hole in the front of your wallet. So just make sure that the stitched X is facing up and only clip the bottom corners. Like that. Then we can remove this pin. And now we have a hole where we can start turning the right side out. So we're going to do this in 2 stages. As it's being turned out, you'll notice that it's kind of inside out, but don't worry, we'll fix it. So now we've got it this far, use your pointed tool to push those top corners out. So now you should have something that looks like that. Then reach in to that folded section and turn it right side out again. Now it's starting to look somewhat like a wallet. We just need to push these bottom corners out. So I'll push them out as much as I can using my fingers through that opening in the bottom section there. And now I'll insert my chopstick into that, in through that opening, and gently push the corners out a little bit more. And then I'll take that over to the ironing board and give it a good press, especially on these end pieces here, remembering not to touch the vinyl with your iron. So just a couple of tips on pressing. It's probably best to do it in 2 stages. So firstly, press this fold along piece A here, like that. Then, to avoid melting the vinyl, flip the wallet over and press from the outside, and just being careful if you have a plastic snap not to melt that either, so just perhaps avoid the snap there. Then once you've done that, the only thing left to do now is to hand sew the opening closed, which is inside the cash pocket. So we need to turn that inside out again. Don't push the corners out, just leave those for now. So you've got a 4-inch gap along here that you need to close. Just tuck all your loose threads in. Then this loose piece A, fold the seam allowance in and then place that on that fold on your stitching line on this darker piece here, which is piece B. And then one to clip that in place. And this stitching doesn't have to be neat, as it's on the inside of the wallet and it won't be seen. So just hand stitch that in place, just being careful not to get your stitches on the outside of the wallet. As an alternative to hand stitching the opening closed inside the cash pocket there, you can do a row of top stitching along this bottom accent border here, which will close up that opening in the bottom. You can also do a row of top stitching along this outer edge of the cash pocket as well. But choose what method works for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed making this wallet, and thanks again for purchasing the Slimline Wallet pattern.